Hello, welcome to the lesson on morality and religion. You should go through this in connection with the assigned reading, Does Morality Depend on Religion? By James Rachels. We're going to discuss a few controversial ideas here in this lesson, but the basic idea will be that no matter how religious you are, there might be other grounds, philosophical grounds, that stand apart from any religious belief system that might serve as a basis for a moral point of view. So, we're going to express some doubts about using religious arguments throughout the course, but in so doing, we don't mean to talk you out of those religious beliefs. We're just going to see if there are ways to stand apart from that. So, let us get started. First off, one big question: how are morality and religion related? We probably couldn't count the ways here. But it's safe to say that historically speaking, morality and religion have had a lot to do with each other. Just consider, has a society without religion ever developed a system of morality? It might be difficult to find one in our historical record, as there are so few that fail to develop any kind of religious belief system. Can we trace our own moral code back to religion? Probably. Many of our widely shared moral beliefs have their roots in religious texts, or at the very least, they share those principles in common. If morality and religion are so intertwined, we might ask, is there a way to untie them? Let's look at it in a different way. When someone says morality is the basis for religion, they could mean one of two things. First, they could mean that religion can be used to explain morality. The institution of religion, if you will, could be explained in terms of the cause of morality. People happen to base their values on religious traditions, beliefs, and so on. On the other hand, religion can be used to justify moral beliefs, principles, and so on. That's to say that a certain action is right or wrong because certain religious teachings say that it's wrong, as opposed to an explanation which would involve saying, well, I believe that religion is wrong because that's what that's how I've been raised in a certain religious tradition. That would be an explanation as opposed to a justification. Now, moral philosophers, our concern here, tend to be more interested in number two. They might consider whether God's will can be a moral justification for conduct. Let's consider an example then, involving religion and homosexuality. One common argument, as you may know, against homosexuality or homosexual acts is that homosexuality is wrong because the Bible says so. Maybe that's an oversimplification, but let that be a starting point for us to investigate. Many of those who would make that claim are drawing upon Leviticus 18:22 from the King James Bible, which says, "Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination." Now, we'll explore this claim. It's been suggested that this is really more a matter of interpretation, that this prohibition or general condemnation of male sexuality might actually be subject to different interpretations, as religious scholars have argued. Do not lie with a man as if it were the same thing as lying with a woman. It's been suggested what that means is that when two males have a sexual encounter, they should be aware that it is different from a male-female coupling. It might be interpreted to mean then set up a different set of rules, institutions for dealing with this different kind of sexual relationship. Don't treat a male-male relationship just like a male-female relationship. Now, is that the correct interpretation? I couldn't say. The argument is that it's a very plausible interpretation of that, and who is to say that what's said here doesn't just mean this? And if it does mean something more like this, that means that it's really not an outright prohibition or condemnation of such homosexual behavior. Do not sleep with a man as if you were with a woman is another interpretation. If two males engage in a sexual act, neither should pretend that one partner is like a woman. Again, it's been suggested that this is a plausible interpretation of what that part of the Bible says. It could also mean that a man should not sleep with another man as he sleeps with another woman. That is to say, more literally, don't bring a man into the marital bedroom. Now, these interpretations are controversial, but again, the point is that there are ways of understanding what's in that part of Leviticus that don't really amount to outright prohibitions. Now, this poses a problem for those who might look to the Bible as a source of moral justification, as a source of justification for their moral views, because two reasonable people, in many circumstances, could read the Bible and take away different things, come away with two different but equally plausible interpretations of what they read. And that would make the Bible, at the very least, an uncertain guide to moral behavior. When someone takes away from what they read here that homosexuality is wrong, they're actually working with a very specific interpretation of it, one that's really not within the four corners of the page, so to speak. But now we're getting closer to the heart of the matter. In what sense could religious teachings or scriptures be a source of moral authority? Even if the problem of interpretation that we just discussed went away, it's important to consider that there would still be other problems that might reflect even deeper concerns. Even if every religious text, say that the central text representing each of the major religions, was really subject to one and only one interpretation, that's to say that there's really only one way of understanding the King James Bible, and it is completely clear. Same goes for the Koran and the 5 books of Moses, and so on. Still, we have this problem. The scriptures I just mentioned, they represent different religious traditions, and they often disagree. Could there be multiple sources of authority? Are we going to say that, well, what's right or wrong simply depends on the religion you believe in? Well, that raises issues of cultural relativism, which we're dealing with in another lesson. Suffice to say, that idea might be somewhat implausible. Sure, one religious adherent might follow one set of scriptures, but that's a matter of choice or faith. And if it comes down to that, that would mean that all the moral teachings that come from those scriptures would really rest on simple choice or faith. And it'd be difficult for us to say that we really have a good reason, a good independent reason to believe those moral teachings and not others. Still, suppose that problem went away. Suppose there's one religion. We all follow it. We all subscribe to the same religious belief system, the same scriptures. There would still be a problem in recognizing religion as the ultimate source of moral authority. So there's an argument submitted for your consideration that religion ought not to be regarded as a basis for morality. And it goes back to this idea of the so-called Euthyphro dilemma. Now, to get the big picture on this, you will probably want to refer back to the assigned reading, Does Morality Depend on Religion by James Rachels, as he outlines what we're about to get into and explains it in more detail than we could possibly get into in a lecture like this, unless we were going to spend another hour. So please look at that carefully. I'm going to give you some of the highlights here. The Euthyphro is the title of a so-called Platonic dialogue, a work of philosophy written by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. It's in the form of a dialogue. It's something like a play. Euthyphro is also one of the main characters in this. Socrates, the other character, who in fact was Plato's teacher, engages Euthyphro in a discussion on the nature of morality. And there's a whole story behind this. But what it comes down to is Euthyphro, this individual, argues that he needs to take a certain controversial course of action because it's what the gods command. I say gods in the plural. Ancient Athens was a polytheistic society, but we could translate it into terms we could better relate to today just by speaking of one god. It really won't make a difference. Euthyphro is saying that the action he's taking is good because the gods command it. But Socrates, in turn, poses this question. Is what is morally good commanded by God because it is morally good? Or is it morally good because it is commanded by God? Now, as we just discussed, Euthyphro seems to think the answer is number 2. But if that's true, then isn't God arbitrary? If something is morally good simply because God commanded it, it's a fair question to ask, well, why did God command it? Why did God command that murder is wrong and not commit as much murder as he possibly can? Well, if he didn't have a reason and we want to say, well, murder is wrong just because God says so, then it's a fair question. Isn't God being arbitrary? Did God just flip a coin? Did he just decide one day? Could God have commanded then that homicide be tolerated or even required? It's admittedly hard to conceive of how or why God would command the opposite of this, but why wouldn't he? If part of you thinks that, no, God would never do that, then the question is why? If you're inclined to think in the least that God prohibits murder, God forbids murder, because respect for life is morally good, then you are actually recognizing that God made a certain choice. God chose to issue a certain command for certain other reasons. What are those reasons? We couldn't say now. It's a bit besides the point. It's considered a dilemma for somebody that has a religious orientation towards morality. They're faced with 2 choices, 2 alternatives, only 2, but neither of them are particularly attractive. Either God commands what God commands for reasons external, which would suggest that, in fact, God is not the ultimate authority on all these things, because he's looking to reasons independent of him. Or he's just being arbitrary, and neither of those are particularly attractive. Which one is more acceptable? The suggestion is that God is not the ultimate source of morality after all. It might be fair to say, well, I choose to conduct my life this way because God has ordered me to do so. But if God had further reasons for issuing that order, then there are further reasons that could justify our judging certain actions as right or wrong. And perhaps we could try to look to those reasons as well. So even if we have a strong religious orientation, we might see that the door is open for the possibility of a philosophical exploration of morality that looks beyond any sort of religious text. And I'd like you to consider that, so that we might try to put religious teachings, religious considerations to one side as we consider other perspectives on morality. That about wraps it up for us. This will make it easier for us to turn to some of the other topics we'll encounter in the rest of the course. So thank you for considering this.